284 Goddamn religion. Sunnah and Suratun. Muhammad's despicable life, Allah's repulsive words. 3. False prophet. Will you succumb to witchcraft and enchanting sorcery? Quran 21.003. Before we part company, I want to expose one of the most obscure details of the Quran to demonstrate the direct correlation between Islam and the tragic events unfolding before our eyes. Between 2,500 and 3,000 years ago, real prophets named Daud, Shalomo, Yashaya, Yirmiyah, Zachariah, and Malachi foretold the events that are materializing at this time. Central to their prognostications was that the world would turn against Jews and Israel, something we are watching play out before our very eyes. This includes what would have been difficult to foresee prior to 2024 because a nation known for its wings and naval prowess, in a land across the sea divided by rivers, an aggressive people renowned for meddling around the world, America, would turn against Israel. Then, as a result of the imposition of an Islamic state carved from her midst, the land will be narrowed at the waist and become indefensible. Soon thereafter, Muslim terrorists, the prophecies portend, will flood into the promised land with the intent of raping, robbing, abducting, and slaughtering Jews. It will be a reenactment of what occurred on October 7, 2023, only 100 times more intense. And in the aftermath, the world will be drawn into global conflict. 285 But what obscure detail in the Quran, you may be asking, led us to this horrific portrayal of mankind's impending doom? The answer is Gog and Magog. Allah mentions them twice, in Quran 18.094 and then again in Quran 21.096. Since Muhammad was illiterate and Allah was dumb as a stone, the source of this material is obvious. It came from Yathrib rabbis. While they were aware of the predictions in Ezekiel, they were not cognizant that he was not only a false prophet but, like Muhammad, the devil's advocate. Unaware that Yahowah provided a test to determine the authenticity of a prophet and, therefore, not knowing any better, Muhammad took the poisonous bait and stashed it away inside the Quran. The surah is hypocritically named Al-Anbiya, the prophets, since the Quran has failed to deliver even one accurate prediction. And now, it includes false prophecies. But these are not random mistakes but, instead, taunts. Even as the rabbis remained enthralled with all 5 Babylonian texts, Daniel, Ezekiel, Esther, Jonah, and Job, unaware that they were all false prophets, Satan knew what he had inspired. And he was not only proud of having beguiled religious Jews into including his autobiography and intended playbook among Yahowah's actual prophets, he would use it against them once again. In a book without words, ink, or pages, and from an abomination of a Suratun without the appeal of a prophet, the devil's recital begins. Quran 21.001 Approached Linasi, the uplifted, mankind, their consideration while they ignorant and forgetful, heedlessly turning away. Muslims are confronted by 6 conundrums. First, why is al-Lahi/hu/ha rebuffed every time he allegedly approaches? Second, why were none of the other attempts to reveal his nature and purpose reported? And why is the only surviving message so inarticulate and contradictory? Third, why was the Hebrew verb nasa, to lift up, used to 286 convey mankind here and elsewhere? With numerous options available, humankind could have been conveyed as Adam man, Aish individual men, Inaush mortal men, Gerber valiant men, or M people, even Gawam Gentiles. Fourth, why is the ungod equating consideration with ignorance since they are incompatible concepts? Fifth, what is it that the uplifted had forgotten? And sixth, what does al-Lahi/hu/ha have against verbs? If, as the ungod claims, this is a reminder from Rabbi him, then when, where, and to whom was the novel narration previously conveyed? And if the recently regurgitated variation was so unappealing that it made those who listened drool catatonically, whose fault is that? Quran 21.002 So not comes not to them from a reminder from Rabbi him their greatly exalted Lord, recently related and represented, a novel narration, anew, except they listen to it while they play around, joking and jesting, stupidly drooling. Now that we have considered the entire Quran, we realize that no one was joking around. The recitals of Muhammad and Allah were demonic and deadly, psychotic and sadistic. They were anything but amusing. Having spent the past 2 decades translating the Hebrew text of the Torah, Nabi, wa Mizmor, I am familiar with the realization that words can have a dark and light side, with the proper connotation ascertained by context. But in the Quran, without context, we are left befuddled by what appears to be a melody of sour notes and conflicting notions. Quran 21.003 Their hearts kulubuhum diverted and distracted, preoccupied and beguiled, amused by a diversion and thus careless and forgetful, and so asaru al-najwa they speak secretly of the salvation, divulging deliverance, revealing and concealing the freedom, conceal private conversations, those who zalim cruel lords and oppressors, wronged. 287 Is this except basar flesh, a human being, mithlookum standing erect, mutilating and castrating you, like you? Afadatuna So would you give, grant, or bring al-sayare the change in direction and false appearance, the falsification and embellishment, magic, witchcraft, and sorcery, while you have eyes? To whom is al-Lahi/hu/ha speaking, Arabs, Jews, Christians, pagans, or an imaginary foe? Why is everyone talking behind the snake's back? Are they doing so because they are both afraid of him and disgusted by him? And is the secret counsel on salvation, freedom, and deliverance considered threatening to Satan because he opposes these things? Is the Islamic God unaware that he should not be using zalim, which depicts the cruel and subjugating Lord, to besmirch people when he is one? Further, why use basar to convey human being when the word, when spoken as a noun, means animal, flesh, meat, and skin? As a verb, basar is interesting because it speaks of a herald conveying important news. But either way, basar is Hebrew. Similarly, why did the adversary use mithel standing erect, mutilating and castrating to say, like, when ka similar to and like would have conveyed this intent without the derogatory baggage? Likewise, Satan should have used kashaf to say, practicing magic, witchcraft, and sorcery, instead of siyare, because it is incriminating. Siyare reveals that the Suratans altered the original message to give a false appearance through fabrication and embellishment. After all, since al-Lahi who is pretending to be God, one would expect a better grasp of the language. As we consider the next statement, who is he and why is he interjecting himself into this false narrative with unidentified people? Quran 21.004 He said, My Rabbi knows al-Qala the 288 speech, voice, and noise the high and lofty name, heavens, and the ground. And he the hearing, the knowing sign and mark. Quran 21.005 Nay they say, Adgathu Alameen confused and confounding, just a bunch of muddled visions of wet dreams of copulation while sleeping. Nay, if Tarahu he invented it by splitting it apart, cutting it off, fabricating it and slandering. Nay, he a shair and poet making up verses on symbols and rites. Let him bring us an ayatin a sign, some proof, a mark or indication of evidence, as al-Awwaluna the former family and people. I realize that we turn to the 21st Suratun to ascertain why the Islamic deity chose to insert the fable of Gog into his Quran. Therefore, starting at the beginning may seem misdirected. But, I think it is equally important to acknowledge the true identity of the voice of the Quran and appreciate his intent. Since we've come this far, and since so much is at stake, especially for God's people, let's give this our best effort and see it through. And as we do, a word about the evolving nature of these translations. I began with a composite of the 5 most popular renditions of the Quran, correcting them by reflecting upon the insights gleaned from the Nobel Quran's interlinear. Thereafter, I began to consider other interlinears, Arabic dictionaries, and especially the Hebrew origins of the words we were considering. And while the resulting representations of the underlying text are more comprehensive and correct, they are so divergent from those composed by Muslims devoted to making their God appear lucid that I'm placing their extrapolations in parenthetical so that we remain aware of what Allah's slaves are reading. The reason that I did not begin this way, nor go back and edit what I had previously written, is that I needed to earn your trust. It's one thing to present the Quran from the literal standpoint of a published and scholastic interlinear derived from the most popular Quran translation 289 worldwide, and another to convey what the words actually mean based upon Arabic lexicons. However, by the time we entered volume 4 of Goddamn Religion Slaughter together, I thought we were ready to turn over the last of Allah's stones and reveal what was actually beneath each of them. And even now, if you prefer to listen to Muslims lie about their God, please visit islamawaken.com and select their translation pages index or concordance index. There you'll find some 66 English translations in addition to an interlinear, lexicon, and concordance of the Quran. As proof that al-Lahi/who/ha was a lousy communicator, no one believed him. Quran 21.006 Not believed, accepted previously from Quraydan cities or towns who entertained this and investigated, doing a diligent search, al-Lahi which we destroyed, spoiling, killing, and wasting, then losing. So, will they feel safe or secure? The only thing worse than claiming to have routinely and repetitively wiped out entire communities, cities, and civilizations is bragging about having done so when it never occurred. This bragging combines delusional and psychotic with sadism. Dare we ask, who was killed, where, and when? Why is there no evidence of this in archaeology or literature? While al-Lahi/ha/ who has always been impotent, he has been influential and has managed to seduce a significant number of malcontents to murder for him. As a result, no one in their right mind feels safe and secure around Muslims. Quran 21.007 And not our Salna we sent message to you to accept, before you, but Rijalan feet, men, Nuhi we indicated, dispatching a messenger to reveal and suggest to them. So ask by interrogating possessors, people, who remember and recollect if you not know. In Hebrew, from which Arabic was bastardized, sent, is from shalak and messenger, is derived from malake. 290 Neither is conveyed through razuli, of which there is no Hebrew equivalent. Of the Rosh Shin words, we find Rasha, the criminal and evil nature of religion, Rasha, to be wrong and condemnable, Rasham, to sign off on an inscription, Rishe, to set a trap for mankind, Rashash, to beat men down, shattering their hopes, while impoverishing them, Risha, to be wickedly religious, and Rishef, flames of fire. There is, however, a Hebrew word for feet, regal, and that is what we find here instead of any one of the same options for men. Not only hasn't anyone been identified in the Suratun, but we are left to guess who is to be interrogated. What are these unidentified people supposed to remember? And how are their unspecified recollections supposed to jive with the message of the undisclosed Razuli in his unstated message? Or stated another way, why bother with any of this without explanations? The only informed and rational response to the gibberish we are reading is to mock it, which is what those who listened to the non-prophet and ungod had done. The message was as muddled as it was demonic. Not only was there no sense of organization or morality, there were no prophecies. So the rabbi protests. Quran 21.008 And not we made them coagulate and sticky, bodies, not swallowing the eating, and not remaining immortals. Quran 21.009 Then we truthful them the promise, and we saved them in whom we willed, and we destroyed, wasting, spoiling, and killing the suckling children, the ignorant, the extravagant, and the boundless, transgressors. Quran 21.010 Lo, verily, we have sent down to you a Kitaban writing, book, into Crookham your reminder, mention. No doubt, not, or do not you reason and are intelligent. Quran 21.011 And how many of communities, cities, and civilizations have we utterly destroyed, completely demolishing, 291 while shattering to be a cruel lord and oppressive subjugator, wrongdoer. And we arose in the darkness of night, produced, remote and aloof, estranged and distant, after, them standing still, people, go backwards, other. Quran 21.012 Then when they were slaughtered and destroyed, routed and tread upon, devoured and burned, perceived, our impoverishing and adversarial evil, our miserable punishment, then they from it were running and fleeing. Quran 21.013 Not or no doubt flee and run, and return so not or what your good life, the pursuit of luxury, pleasure, and wealth in it and to your quiet and restful dwelling so that you may be interrogated. Quran 21.014 They said, O woe to us! Lo, verily, we zalim cruel and exploitive, oppressive tyrants, obscure and unjust, dark and deprived, savage and ferocious lords, wrongdoers. Quran 21.015 Then not ceased this their desire to call out, cry, until we made them and subside, utterly extinguished in the blazing flame, mowed and cut down, slain and exterminated, reaping annihilation. This begins bad and gets progressively worse. Satan would have Muslims believe that they were not made to coagulate, which means that they would bleed to death. They were not designed to swallow while eating, such that they would starve to death. And they were designed to die, which seems redundant at this point. All the while, al-Lahi who is offering the truthful promise of salvation to those he made to fail, but only if he wants. Otherwise, it's destruction, wasting, and spoiling, even killing the suckling children, the ignorant, extravagant, and unrestrained. Not surprisingly, the truthful deity of Islam lies, claiming that he has provided a written book when there had been none. It was a reminder, even though it was not like anything before or after it. And if that were not sufficiently erroneous and irrational, no doubt, not you reason and are intelligent. 292 Ever the schizophrenic terrorist and delusional sadist, the ungod, having forgotten himself, queries, how many civilizations have we utterly destroyed? Then based upon the sentence structure and definitions, the ungod acknowledges that he did so to demonstrate his cruelty as a tyrant and oppressive lord. What follows is odd by almost any standard. I suspect that al-Lahi who meant to say that those he slaughtered he replaced with others so that he'd have slaves to perpetrate genocide for him in the future, not wanting to get his scales dirty and all. But that isn't what he said, and we arose in the darkness of night, remote and aloof, estranged and distant, after them, standing still, going backwards. Reminding us that he was unique among wannabe gods in that he was a complete psychopath, Allah claims that he slaughtered and destroyed, routed and tread upon, devoured and burned while impoverishing, being evil and adversarial, such that his victims tried to flee. But nay, they were not allowed to run, and were compelled to return or not, to the good life, which is to be interpreted as bad. But how bad can it be when it depicts Muhammad's pursuit is luxury, pleasure, and wealth? That notwithstanding, it leads to being interrogated. When this occurs in the Quran, the victims typically cop a plea, admitting that they were acting as if they were Allah. Here, under interrogation, the unidentified prisoners claim that they were zalim, which is to say, cruel, subjugating and oppressing others as if they were dark and savage lords. They are as Allah has described himself. Nonetheless, Allah's rivals in life are constantly crying in death as they are extinguished in the flames, mowed down and exterminated. It is so oft-forgiving and most merciful of the devilish Lord of the Quran. But don't mistake any of this for playfulness. Allah is all business, and he is the merchant of death and the purveyor of hellish 293 torments. Quran 21.016 And not we measured or proportioned the high and lofty and the ground and what not between them, for play, joking and jesting as a stupid drooler. Quran 21.017 If we wanted that we take a diversion so as to forget, a preoccupation to beguile, a careless amusement, pastime, lo, verily we would have taken it from us if we were doers. What is worse, a depressed wannabe god who is a cosmic killjoy, opposed to enjoying life, one preoccupied with beguiling because it is a careless amusement, or an inarticulate one who makes no sense at all. And clearly, Allah has a hobby. It is called terror and torture. But also evident, his vocation was not clearly communicating as he was at best, quasi-literate. I pity those who believe that this patronizing rubbish was from God. Quran 21.018 Nay, we pelt, casting off and doing away with that which is suitable, factual, and proper for the sake of the false, fictitious, and unsound, the spurious, vain, and futile. And it breaks its head, damaging the brain, prevailing destroying it. Then, lo, it vanishes and is for naught. And for you, woe, this threat for what you describe, assert, and ascribe. The more stones we examine, the more we come to realize that al-Lahi/who/ha is either too dumb for words or he believes that Muslims are idiots, perhaps both. Here, he is seen pelting the truth, casting off what would be considered suitable, and thus rational and moral, and doing away with everything factual and proper. And he is casting aspersions against reality because he favors the fictitious and spurious, no matter how vain or futile. Therefore, the Quran is like a concussion, damaging the brain and destroying the ability to think. Then everything rational is for naught. So, this woe is for you if you are among the informed and thoughtful ascribing demonic qualities to Allah. 294 Allah's little helpers would have Muslims believe that this next verse says that no one is too proud in the heaven or on the earth to worship their God, and that they never weary from doing so. It's not how the words read, but no matter the interpretation, it isn't even remotely accurate. Quran 21.019 And lahu to him who in the high and lofty name, heavens, and the ground, earth, and who deviate as rebellious and obstinate tyrants to him. Not hard or disputing to worship him, and not they get tired, fatigued, or jaded with regrets. Quran 21.020 They swim, rolling, floating, and performing, glorify, the night and the repulsive, browbeaten, and chiding, day, not they flag, abate, desist, or diminish. Only Allah knows what this means. Quran 21.021 Or they taken gods from the fertile ground and earth to spread out, resurrect. Quran 21.022 If were in them gods besides Allah who the for him, lo, they would become evil, corrupted, invalid, and both would have been ruined. Swimming to magnified, floating to be glorified, al-Lahi the to him, Rabbi exalted Lord and great master the trellis, vine, arbor, and throne, what they attribute, describe, and specify. I guess it makes sense in a way. Recognizing that Allah is the most inane and dim-witted of all false gods, he does not want any competition. Quran 21.023 Not he be questioned about what he does, but they will be interrogated. Then he cannot be God because Yahowah encourages and answers questions. It is how we learn. It's just a wee bit hypocritical for the ungod and non-prophet to demand proof from other gods when they couldn't provide any of their own. And how is this a reminder when there was no prior record of a god saying any such thing? And speaking of saying such a thing, since no one seems to know what muraduna means, I decided to express 295 the various renditions of the word as it appears throughout the Quran. So, what follows isn't a disagreement between translators but, instead, with the same translator. Quran 21.024 Or they taken from besides him gods. Say, bring your proof. This a reminder to remember who with me and a reminder who before me. But most of them know the suitable requirements so they muraduna take place, present and propound, desert in aversion and turn away, refrain, exhibit in cloud, hint of goods and display again, offering a lengthy width, exposed. At long last we find a sentence in the Quran that is entirely true. Quran 21.025 And not we sent from before you any ajalin messenger. Not we indicated and revealed, suggesting to him that he not God but me. So worship me. Muhammad was the ungod's first and last, even worst and best Rasuli. And clearly, he was no god since he wasn't even a capable man. But these facts do not make al-Lahi/who/ha divine or worthy of worship, not that anyone should be venerated in this way. However, a decade before al-Lahi/who/ha became the ungod of the non-prophet and appeared in his unbook, there was another. And he was an emigrant, an interloper and an illegal alien, without a stone to call his own in the rock pile to rock gods. And the reason why this vagrant was an unwelcome addition to the pagan pantheon in Babel that was inclusive of 360 other false gods, even Jesus, was because Rahman was a misnomer, one that Sabaean Arab converts to Judaism in today's Yemen had used to replace Yahowah's name. They had done so because their rabbis had ousted Yahowah from their Torah, Talmud, Judaism, and lives, thereby enabling Islam. Quran 21.026 And they say, Rahman has begotten a son. Glorified is he. Nay, slaves productive and valuable. As we have come to expect, in trying to hide the Quran's identity crisis, Islamic translators become 296 copy editors. They either replace Rahman's name with Allah or God when neither was mentioned, or they translate it as the most beneficent, Allah. Since only one of the 5 translations used to create the common compilation initially presented in goddamn religion rendered the statement accurately, it is obvious that the Islamic publishing houses are complicit in the fraud of the Quran. But it is to be expected because they are slaves productive and valuable. Without his slaves, Satan, by any name, is nothing but a demonic blowhard. To promote the myth that he is God, the Rabbi/Lord/Rahman/al-Lahi/who/ha/Allah, the Ilah God of Islam's submission, must drive a herd of overburdened flea-bitten camels through the convoluted eye of a revisionist needle using ill-fitting implements while passing out warped and occluded glasses, hoping no one would actually think. Unable to provide a sign, offer a prophecy, produce a book, find a credible Rasuli, inspire a sane message, or even communicate intelligently, the adversary must convince those he intends to dehumanize, enslave, and slay that he was the God of the Torah and prophets because he is everything the snake is missing and covets. But that's a problem since Yahowah worked alongside his people with his Torah. Guidance and teaching directing them along the way. And his path leads in the opposite direction, toward emancipation, not enslavement, to enrichment, not impoverishment, to enlightenment rather than ignorance, and to shemaim, not shi'al. So, what was a snake to do? Busting out of his scales, the snake who slithered out of the garden and into the desert claims that the Christian God, Jesus Christ, was not only his slave, but was akin to a monkey on a chain. Quran 21.027 Not they in advance surpass or overtake him in speaking, and they by his command, perform. 297 Quran 21.028 He knows what between their hands and what they broke, differed, substituted, or superseded, disputed and betrayed, and they cannot intercede, protect, or even out except for whom he was approved, was satisfied, or preferred. And they for fear and dread of him, terrified by him, are pitiful, terrorized, and afraid. Quran 21.029 And whoever says of them, Lo, verily, I am a God from besides him, then that we will render hell. Thus we repay the reconciled. Therefore, not only did the Islamic ungod claim to have turned Jews into monkeys and pigs, he made the Christian God, Jesus, equally ineffectual and detestable, demoting him to the status of a Muslim slave dancing at Satan's command. Even worse, the Christian Jesus is trembling in fear, terrified of whatever the Islamic God's name might be at this point, pitifully peeing himself. And even that wasn't enough for Satan because he insists that the mythical misnomer of Christianity, the God of 3 billion people, is destined for hell. And while terrorizing mythical people is al-Lahi/who/ha's forte, his current target just so happens to be Jesus, who he intends to roast in the hellfires. You'd think this would be sufficient to turn Christians against Allah, Islam, Muhammad, and the Quran. However, by adding a large dose of terror and labeling any perceived amount of opposition as Islamophobia, everyone trembles and falls prostrate before the snake. That is the essence of Allah, Islam, and the Quran. Be humbled and humiliated before the ungod who allegedly ripped the earth out of the heavens, parting that which was previously one piece. Quran 21.030 Do not see those who kafir are covered and reconciled, disbelieve, deny, and are ungrateful, that the heavens and the earth were joined together as one single entity, then we split, broke, and disjoined them, rending them apart and cleaving them asunder. And we made from water all matters and affairs alive. 298 Then will not they believe? Quran 21.031 And we made in the earth, firm and immovable stabilizers, stable mountains, lest it shake and agitate with them with violent motion. And we made therein wide highways and conspicuous roadways as a path and way so that they may be guided. Quran 21.032 And we have made the heavens a roof as a ceiling, guarded. But they from its signs and proof turn away. As should every informed and rational person. Satan is conducting the least credible audition for God ever undertaken. Allah is a complete dunderhead and nincompoop. The heavens by any measure, as the sky, universe, or spiritual realm, were never joined together with the earth or ground as one entity. They were not broken, cleaved, torn asunder, or disjoined. While there are hundreds of billions of galaxies, each with over 100 billion stars, many replete with solar systems, all comprised of an incalculable number of molecular parts, the space between them exceeds that which might be considered unified by an enormous extent. Sorry, snake, but it is always better to remain silent and appear stupid than to open your mouth and remove all doubt. Of the 9 proofs the ungod offered, 8 were completely wrong and the other, while partially correct, was misappropriated from the Torah, which preceded the Quran by some 22 centuries. The universe began as energy without matter. There has been expansion as Yahowah explained, but no parting. Our solar system, including the Earth, is the product of a supernova explosion of a dying first-generation star whose energy passed through a nebula cloud of gas, water, and particulate. Life, as Yahowah explained, emerged in water, but it is made of a great deal more than just water. There are no 299 earthly stabilizers, just the opposite. Tectonic plate movement is beneficial and conducive to life. And mountains are caused by it, so they do not prevent shaking. Highways were all created by men, not by a god, real or imagined. And rather than showing the way, they provide many ways that lead in many different directions, some opposed to one another. The heavens, as mostly space, are the antithesis of a roof. And the skies are not guarded by stars or jinn, no matter how subservient they may all be to Allah's command. Therefore, in trying to step outside of the Torah to establish his turf, Islam's ungod did nothing more than demonstrate that he has no clue what he is talking about. And now, adding insult to injury, the unknowing and unaware, brags. Quran 21.033 And he the one who measured and proportioned, created, the night and the repulsed flow, day, and the sun and the moon, each in Falcon round ship Yasbahuna floating and swimming, glorifying. Neither night nor day was created. They are products of the earth's rotation on its axis. The sun does not orbit but, instead, the earth. And neither the sun nor the moon float. Further, Falcon, the word rendered as orbit in English Quran translations actually means round ship and is conveyed as such on 23 of the 25 times it appears in these suratans. Moreover, Yasbahuna, which is typically misrepresented as glorifying Allah, actually means to swim or float, which would then confirm that the ungod was calling the sun and moon ships. Stupid is as stupid says. What more should one expect from a reptile? But what is the excuse of the translators? Quran 21.034 And not we made libashar a body, animal flesh, or meat, any man, from before you the remaining. So if you die, they remain. Quran 21.035 Every soul taste the death. And we try and test 300 you with the evil and ill-natured faults, even fire, and the good, fitnat and a burning persecution and affliction, a seduction and temptation to err and slaughter by faith. And to us you will be returned, made to answer, and terminated. With 6 words to choose between to describe humankind, al-Lahi/who/ha selected Basar the flesh and body of an animal. And even then, he was out of his mind. All physical bodies degrade over time. They can never be immortal. Our Nipesh souls must become entirely energy-based, and thus akin to light, to endure. This is one of many arguments demonstrating the utter idiocy of bodily resurrection. Contrary to the ungod's claims, every Nipesh soul will not taste or experience death. Those of covenant members will endure forever with Yahowah. And spirits and souls of those who, like Allah and Muhammad, opposed God's people, will endure forever in Sheol. And while the choices we make in life determine our fate, there are no trials of fire, burning persecution, seduction, or temptation. There is no test of faith, much less one which results in erring and slaughtering. The snake is out on a limb of delusions. Other than Adam and Chawwa, we do not begin our lives with God. And very few, less than 1 in a million, will be with him after their mortal lives conclude. Of those, only one, Adam, has the potential to return. So on this claim, even if he were God, he would be wrong. Quran 21.036 And when they see you, those who are reconciled not they take you except in contempt, deriding, ridiculing, and mocking. Is this the one who remembers your gods? And they, at re-embrace al-Rahman, they kafir reconciled, disbelieving infidels. It is a curiosity as to why the Quran, which was supposedly written before the universe was conceived as the final message, was so fixated on the minutiae of 1301 man's struggle for credibility while authorizing lying, perverted sex, draconian power, stolen plunder, and mass murder. And yet, with the inclusion of the never-ending argument, the Quran's credibility is undermined by repeatedly acknowledging that those who knew the non-prophet best held him in contempt, mocking and ridiculing him. And in this case, the charge is particularly damning for Allah because Muhammad is being shown, remembering, the gods of the Quraysh in addition to adding Rahman into the mix. This not only makes Allah one of many pagan gods, but also just one of 6 Quranic deities, Rahman, Rahim, Al-Lat, Al-Uzza, and Manat, along with the Rabbi Allah/Hi/Hu, and just one of 7 when taking into account Yahowah's position among the Yahud. But as we know, al-Lahi/Ha/Hu was playing a numbers game. He only needed a sufficient number of ruthless jihadists among the first Muslims to subdue Arabs in Yathrib with force of arms. They would, in turn, force capitulation of the other Arab tribes and communities with the sword, not the Quran. And from there, they would ransack India, Persia, and Byzantium through terror. By the time there were enough arms holding swords, there was no reason for them to hold a Quran in the other. From there, gang mentality and fear, with a large helping of sadistic brutality, would do the trick and it would be game over. Today, 1,400 years later, we are witnessing Satan's magnum opus with the impending destruction of Israel and the genocide of Jews, inspiring the final world war. This snake from the desert has even managed to get progressives the world over to fan hell's flames. Clever. It remains curious, however, that the Islamic ungod doesn't seem to know if his name is Rahman or Allah, if he is one, me, and my in verse 37, or many, we and us in verse 35, or if he should converse in first or third person. But at this point in his quest to rise from snake to Lord, he 302 is frustrated that no one believes him. So, his retort is that man was just an afterthought, someone made in haste, as a pawn in the Lord's new pastime. Quran 21.037 is measured and proportioned, created, al-insanu the social companionship and friendly conversation, man, from ajalin hastiness in an inordinate and transitory hurry, impatiently. Soon, I, Rahman, will see, show, you my signs and proofs. So, not ask me tasta'jiluni to hasten, accelerate, or expedite. While it was moronic of him to do so, the Lord of Ignorance affirmed that there had been no signs or proofs. He even went so far as to claim that the unidentified audience should not request them and he would not expedite them even if they did. No signs for you. Somehow unfamiliar with the wide variety of words for man, Rahman is shown continuing to grasp at straws. In an effort to denounce humankind, recognizing that the ungod was an antisocial recluse, he demeaned humanity as social, friendly, and conversational. But at least, the Lord found a transition to his liking because his perceptions of man were transitory. Who are they, and why were they asking? Quran 21.038 and they say, when this promise if you are truthful. Never and he's anything but. Quran 21.039 if knew those who kafir reconciled, unbelievers, time not they will avert, withhold, or refrain from their faces the fire of irritating and vexing flames, and not from their zuhurikim appearance or collaboration, noon, apparent, or support, open or visible backs. And not will they be helped, aided, or protected. Rabbi Rahman is going to provide proof by roasting men and women over the fires of hell. It is so godly of him. And ever the sadist, Satan wants his victims to know that they will not be able to protect their faces or their backs 303 from the vexing flames. So, it appears that he is anticipating impaling people on rotisseries. And who knew that hell was equipped with slaves to run them? Throughout the Quran, the threat never changes. Allah promises to burn the resurrected bodies of disbelievers forever. He dreams of singeing their faces and their backs while they scream for the real God to help them. So this demon is a sneaky bastard, in addition to being a relentless sadist. Therefore, der Brandstifter exclaimed. Quran 21.040 Nay, it will come upon them suddenly, unexpectedly, and unawares, dumbfounding and confusing, even stupefying and falsely accusatory toward them, and they will not be permitted to or capable of averting or repelling it. And they will not be afforded any consideration or shown kindness. Only a sadist could say or plan such a thing. Islam's wannabe God is, therefore, a psychopath with an extreme empathy disorder. And the only individual known to us capable of being this ghoulish and merciless, ruthless and viciously cruel is unquestionably demonic. This is, therefore, Satan attempting to terrorize and control humankind. It is a bit depressing, nonetheless, to realize that 1/4 of the Earth's population believes that there is a God so deranged that he would resurrect humankind just so that he could torture us. And all but perhaps a score of men and women are either so unconcerned or immoral, that they will not lift a finger to stop the ensuing carnage the devil has inspired. Indeed, there is but a single spirit who would make such claims, and through religion and politics, he has managed to play mankind for fools. And in this case, ignorance is not bliss. You can call him Hashem, blessed be he, Adoni, Lord, God, Jesus, Christ, al-Lahi/hu/ha, Rahman, or Allah, so long as you don't call him Satan the adversary. He 304 doesn't even seem to mind Halal ben Shakar. So, the what's my name game continued while the wannabe God grumbled about not getting any respect. Quran 21.041 and lo, verily, brought down and disgraced, shown contempt and ridiculed, laughed at and derided with Rasulai messengers from acceptance and approval, before you. Then surrounded and enveloped so as to recoil from the vehement hate those who mocked, scoffed, and taunted from them what they were at it brought down and disgraced in contempt while laughing and deriding. This is ungodly tit for tat. You mock me and I mock you. However, the only reason the messenger was disgraced is because the message was disgraceful. And there was only one of them, so this hypothesis sinks like a lead balloon. Further, the sadist psychopath is projecting that his victims will try to flee from his all-encompassing torment, but that he will not allow it. Yahowah's messengers mocked, but they were not ridiculed. Elia is a case in point. He demeaned the religious and political of his day using sarcasm to point out the foolishness of believing the kind of false gods presented within the Quran. But he was never disgraced. Lord knows, they would do better if protected from this monster. Quran 21.042 say, who guards you from Ar-Rahman in the night and the repulsive brow-beating and chiding, day. Nay, they from remembrance rabbi him their Lord Muraduna desert, averse, refrain, cloud, hint, gain, display, offer, width, averse, expose, avoid, and turn away, exposed. Since Muraduna is one of those handy Quranic terms that serves as a chameleon, taking on the hue of its surroundings, I thought I'd provide a sampling. You are free to pick whatever rendering you prefer. Quran 21.043 or do they have gods to defend them and protect them, precluding them from us? Not they will obey and 305 consent, even permitted to help themselves. And not they from us can be associated or defended, companions or protected. The Islamic God is so horrible, men and women need to be defended from him. And he is so unapproachable, no one is permitted near him. He is so insistent in torturing his victims, even other gods are unable to fend him off. The religious and political who did not like what Yahowah's prophets revealed were never surrounded because they have always been the majority. But in all of that time, there never was a god needed to protect anyone from a god until this snake raised its creepy fangs. Now, if it would only stop envenomating itself, we might understand what was oozing off its forked tongue. Quran 21.044 Nay, we gave and profited from these and their fathers until grew long for them the life. Then do not they see that we come to the ground? We diminish and waste it from the extremity of its borders. So is they, sick, conquered or conquering, subdued or subduing, surpassed or surpassing, and mastered or mastering, sick. I suggest that we impose some baseline standards for wannabe gods and holy books, beginning with being able to demonstrate that they can compose an intelligible sentence, maybe even string 2 or 3 together. They must occasionally offer something novel and useful and should not be demented or sadistic. No plagiarism or fables allowed. There must be a modicum of consistency rather than constant contradictions, with repetition kept to a minimum. And, of course, the proper use of verbs, prepositions, and actual words is highly recommended. So, based upon this experience, I support excluding reptilian overlords no matter the number they slay or enslave. I would analyze the previous diatribe, but it fails to meet any of these criteria. Should you think I'm being unfair, then feel free to email your suggestions. Quran 21.045 Say, only I vow to warn you by the indication 306 revealed. But not hear the deaf the call when that they are warned. Quran 21.046 And if touches them a diffused odor or a slight whiff of torturous castigation or excessive punishment, of, Rabbika your Lord, surely they will say, Woe to us, lo we were Zalim dark and obscure, oppressors and subjugators, injurious lords, wrongdoers. Why go through this charade of warning when everyone's fate was supposed to be predestined by a backrub in Eden? Wasn't Rahman up to speed with Allah's shtick? In this case, the Lord's torment is supposedly so egregious that a sniff of the aroma of burnt flesh would be sufficient to traumatize the infidels awaiting their chance to serve as faggots for the fire. All the while, we are to believe that the undisclosed victims are nonetheless professing that it's okay because they acted like Allah and therefore deserve eternal torment. And to make matters worse, this torture is being administered in hell by the God of the Quran. So, should anyone be looking for Allah, they know where they must go to find him. This immoral threat was weighed on fixed scales. Quran 21.047 And we lay down and put aside the weighing, the swerving wrongfully and the dealing unjustly for day al-Qiyamati the standing up and still, resurrection, so not will be an oppressive lord or subjugating tyrant, will be wrong, sole thing. And if be heavy weight, loads, or burdens beloved and approved, habitan a pleasurable and preferred clot or beloved pustule, seed, of cardalin, a grain of a well-known tree, we bring with it. And we suffice and are sufficient for thinking and counting. As to why hell's warden would reveal that he intends to lay down and put aside the weighing, only Allah knows. But the reason he is swerving wrongfully and dealing unjustly should now be obvious. Satan cannot be other than he is. Not only isn't there a day of resurrection, there isn't 307 even a word for the morose concept in Arabic. Al-Qiyamati is from the kaf vav mim root and is, therefore, derived from the Hebrew verb qiyam, which means to stand. The perverse notion of reanimating decomposed bones and flesh only exists in religion to tease, taunt, and torment. Since I have composed 2 volumes in the Babel series of Yada Yahowah, abominable and venomous, proving that Ezekiel was a false prophet and devil's advocate, it is germane to recognize that the fabled resurrection of Satan's army in the valley of dry bones to ward off the mythical Gog, not only followed a rant on the 25 ways to annihilate Jews, it precedes the devil's day of doom. One rant simply led to another as if Satan never left Babylon. Habitan is another word for all occasions. While it is commonly rendered seed in this verse, it actually means love, beloved, liked, approved, lovely, pleasing, charming, and pleasurable, in addition to clots, pimples, and pustules. It is translated elsewhere as beloved, dearer, like, and preferred, but mostly as love. So since it is being presented here as having mass, and thus not as an emotion, we are left with clot, pimple, and pustule. Cardalin is a contrived word. It was conveyed using khradallam. In Hebrew a car is a howdah or palanquin, which were enclosed riding compartments on camels, the kind of thing Muhammad used to bring his harem with him as he terrorized surrounding communities. Substituting a mem for the daleth, a carmel is a garden, which could be an orchard, and that would include trees. So then, after serving up another incoherent word salad, the Quran's first God, Rahman, says, and we are sufficient for thinking and counting. Delusions of grandeur. Still grasping for credibility and, therefore, an actual prophet, Rahman claims that he interacted with the man who was responsible for revealing Yahowah's name to his 308 people. It takes chutzpah to perpetrate a fraud of this magnitude. And it takes an idiot to believe him. No, lo, verily, this snake gave nothing to Moses or Aharon, whose names he can neither properly pronounce, explain, nor write. Moses means to draw out from submission to government, religion, and slavery, and thus from the like of Islam. And Aharon is the alternative, providing enlightened free will. Yahowah provided his Torah guidance through Moses, and it is as brilliant and liberating as the Quran is moronic and enslaving. Quran 21.048 And lo, verily, we gave to Musa and Haruna, Moses and Aaron, Al-Furqana the separate party in divided portion, criterion, and an illumination and a reminder for the waiting off, guarding against, and shielding. Quran 21.049 Those who fear and dread, being cautious and wary, their Lord and Master, their owner and possessor in the absent, hidden, remote, and concealed, and they of the freedom, present time, and distant hour pitifully anxious and afraid. Quran 21.050 And this a blessed and kneeling down reminder sent down. Then are you of it, dare to, dislike or disapprove it, being repugnant towards it? To believe that the Lord of the Quran was involved in granting anything to Moses or Aharon, much less the criterion for life, necessitates a level of ignorance and irrationality unparalleled in the human experience. It is, under these circumstances, impossible to express sympathy for Muslims. While there is no reason to live in fear of the rabbi of the Quran because he remains impotent, the fact that he'd encourage such a thing serves to prove that he is a psychotic fraud. Also telling is the realization that the Quran's wannabe God knows that he is absent, hidden, and remote, even deliberately concealed. To expose himself, revealing his true nature would be counterproductive. And 309 Yet, Satan also knows that most people are anxious around freedom and actually prefer conforming to government, social, or religious influences. And here, the rabbi is actually admitting that this human propensity is pitiful. Obviously, the Torah could not have been a reminder because it was Yahowah's initial comprehensive and written communication with humankind. And it would be ridiculous to suggest that the Quran serves as a reminder of it when the messages are diametrically opposed. This surah, inappropriately named the prophets, continues without a prophecy, wallowing instead in yet another protracted rendition of the never-ending argument. That is to say that the surahs which comprise the Quran are variations on the same theme. So now, abusing the reputation of the man Yahowah immortalized through the covenant and in his Torah, Rahman lies. Quran 21.051 And lo, we gave Abraham his guidance from Kablu admitting and accepting, before. And we were about him knowing. Beyond the realization that he's errantly reprising God's story in reverse order, going from misappropriating the relationship with Moses to wrongly claiming to have guided Abraham, this narrative is particularly pathetic. With a dozen chapters of Bereshit Genesis devoted to their exceptionally close relationship, there isn't any possibility that Yahowah would begin an errant retelling of his partnership with Abraham by saying, and we were about him knowing. It would be like me saying, I'm reasonably familiar with the most important aspects of my life. And then from there, go on to share a narrative of things which never occurred. Quran 21.052 When he said to his father in his standing still, people, what these the standing erect, mutilated, and castrated, images, which you to it are arranged, in order, in habit, and prevented, are devoted. 310 Quran 21.053 They said, we found our fathers of them worshippers, submissively obeying. Quran 21.054 He said, Lo, verily, you and your fathers in error, deviating and perplexed between separation and severed, manifest. Quran 21.055 They said, have you come to us with the suitable requirements in reality, truth, or you of those who play, a sport or gamer, a joker or jester, even a drooling fool? This Quranic foolery emerges without reference to the audience, place, time, or nature of the offending religion. Devoid of this context, while replete with dubious dialogue, these verses are as unreasonable today as they were unconvincing yesterday. In a literate world, this rubbish should be rejected and ridiculed. Moreover, while these conversations are incongruent with the religions observed in Sumer circa 2000 BCE, they are so similar to tales told in rabbinical folklore, the inspiration for the incredulous story is obvious. However, since an accurate accounting would have been devastating to the Quran's agenda, the lives of these individuals were reconstituted such that they would serve the Lord's craving to be worshipped as if he were a god in the forsaken deserts of Arabia. And this is why every narrative was perverted such that it replicated Muhammad's struggles in Petra and Yathrib, as is the case here. The agenda is not veiled, but plain to see. In the Torah, Abraham leaves and its people behind and heads north out of Babylon. It is then that he first meets Yahowah. He listens to God and responds, developing the Berith covenant along the way. It was the sole purpose of their relationship, and it was and remains personal and individual. Abraham had no opportunity or reason to engage in public debate with anyone from his hometown. Further, Abraham had no knowledge of 311 Yahowah in and would not come to know him until he had left and was on his way to Haran. Their relationship would then develop within the promised land. Quran 21.056 He said, Nay, your Rabbi Lord the lofty and the ground, the one who created them, and I am to that of the al-Shahid witnesses and martyrs. Quran 21.057 And by al-Lahi that to him, lo, I am about to plot a plan your offensive smelling and strong, idols, after that you go away turning backs. Quran 21.058 So he made them cut and exterminated, broken, pieces, except carbon a hard, grievous, and grown big, arrogant and greater of them, so that they may to it return. Rather than building his case for monotheism and against idolatry, Islam's ungod of many names in the midst of his own personal identity crisis is promoting idolatry. Speaking before imaginary pagans in the presence of their unidentified offensive-smelling idols, validates their religion, telling the pretend people that their Lord was the Lord of creation. He then claims to have witnessed this, taking us to his previous experiences with the sun, moon, and stars. When they rose, they were his Lord, but not when they set. Also troubling, the Islamic Ibrahim is the dim-witted schemer as opposed to the one being plotted against. He allegedly tells his imaginary audience that he is about to hatch a plot to resolve the stench as soon as they turn their backs. Then he exterminates the stinky fellows, except the especially hard and grievous one, the proudest and most akbar of them, the one who has grown really big. And that not only becomes the monotheistic God, but since they are returning to him, he is nothing more than the original pagan deity deprived of his former friends and associates. Sound familiar? And the reason that this story of destructive and dishonest Abraham appears in the Talmud and the Quran, 3:12 but not in the Torah, is because it is religious, counter to Yahowah's instructions, and did not occur. Nonetheless, the fictitious tale continues. Quran 21.059 They said, Who done this to our gods? Verily, he of the oppressive tyrants and cruel lords, wrongdoers. Quran 21.060 They said, We heard a boy remembering and commemorating them. Is called he Ibrahimu. Quran 21.061 They said, Then bring him before eyes the lifted people, so that they may be witnesses and martyrs. Quran 21.062 They said, Did you do this to our gods, O Ibrahimu? Quran 21.063 He said, Nay. Did it their hardest and most grievous, their most grown up and dignified, their greatest and proudest this. So, ask them they speak. Quran 21.064 So they returned to themselves and said, Lo, verily, you the cruel lords and oppressive tyrants, the wrongdoers. Quran 21.065 Then they were upset and shamed, turned upside down on their heads. Lo, you know not these speak. Clearly, Allah was inept at writing dialogue. Since pretend Ibrahim confessed to the crime before committing it, imaginary people knew the culprit. Further, not only would it be odd for a boy to rise to the level of an oppressive tyrant and cruel lord, this adversarial term is being applied to the supposed founder of Islam. Then in the next sentence, rather than having Islamic Ibrahim denounce the false gods, he is shown commemorating them. Not only is the dialogue inept in the 61st verse, it's too late to witness a crime that has already occurred. Making matters worse, the supposed founder of the Islamic religion lies when questioned. Then, rather than accept responsibility, Islamic Ibrahim addresses an undisclosed pagan deity and attests that he is hard, grievous, grown up, dignified, greater than the others, and 313 conceited. Adding insult to injury, Ibrahim tells the pretend audience to question the imaginary idols that he has pulverized. In response, the pretend people equate the Islamic Ibrahim with the Islamic God, calling him a cruel lord and oppressive tyrant. And rather than al-Lahi/ha/hun Ibrahim being embarrassed and ashamed for having turned the truth on its head and discrediting themselves and their religion with this revisionist rubbish regurgitated from rabbinical folklore, it's the people of the most cultured place on earth at the time who are left standing on their heads. In the previous volume, I shared the names and mythology of the gods and goddesses worshipped in Sumer in the 21st century BCE. And there wasn't an al-Lahi/hu/ha among them. Moreover, neither the gods or goddesses were of any benefit to the common people, so this pretense of dialogue was not contextually possible. Quran 21.066 He said, Then do you worship from besides al-Lahi to him what not profit or benefit you a thing and not harms, annoys, or diseases you as an evil adversary? Even if we were to play along and enter fantasyland with al-Lahi/hu/ha, how does one explain away the concluding comment? Is godly status indicative of harming and annoying humankind, infecting and plaguing man as an evil adversary? And even then, the dialogue disintegrates with a classic uffin as a sign of exasperation and disgust on the part of imaginary Ibrahima. Evidently as inarticulate as Muhammad, he asks, Then will not you be bound, preventing reason while abstaining from understanding? Quran 21.067 Uffin as an expression of distress, hate, and disgust toward you and to what you worship from other than, instead or excluding al-Lahi. Then will not you bind, keeping back reason, abstaining from understanding? Having returned their heads to the upright and locked 314 position, the Urians decide that they can help protect their gods, who are now in little crumbled pieces scattered on the floor, by grinding Ibrahima up and scorching him in the way of al-Lahi/ha/hu. Quran 21.068 They said, Burn him, grind him up and scorch him and help protect your gods, if you are doers. But, alas, hell's warden trumped the schemers with a plot of his own. Some 2 billion people believe that their schizophrenic god responded by saying, Quran 21.069 We said, O flames of fire be chilly coolness and safety, a submissive salutation and obedient immunity for Ibrahima. And lest we forget, al-Lahi/ha/hu is the best of the schemers, and seducers, too, especially when spewing vomit and dispensing menstrual flux and fire. Quran 21.070 And they sought, seduced, and enticed for him to be about desiring a clandestine plot to beguile, evade, and elude the vomit, menstrual flux, and fire, but we made them to suffer, cheated and beguiled, treacherously circumvented. And of course, we must ask, since Allah never spoke such that anyone could hear him, why didn't that shame the first Muslims who listened to this nonsense? And why would the supposed patriarch of monotheistic religion lie and tell his people that a pagan god smashed lesser idols? Would that not make the idol real and Ibrahim a deceiver? Equally troubling, the Quranic Abraham called a god false because it cannot harm you. The implication is that the Lord/Rahman/Allah were real because they were sadistic. Also incriminating, here we learn that gods can be saved by burning men. And so now you know the Lord's motivations behind the hellfires. Pushing this fable to the point of absurdity, Islam's ungod was unable to put out the fire, so he spoke to the fire as if it were alive and conversant. His subsequent 315 instructions were to make that which is comprised of radiant energy become chilly and cool, safe and submissive. Then what began poorly ends worse. Quran 21.071 And we rescued, saved, and delivered him and Lot to the ground, land of Israel, which we knelt down and blessed in it for the marks, signs, and known worlds. I suppose the Quran's blessing for Israel is genocide against them. We all witnessed this Muslim godsend on October 7, 2023, replete with burning Jewish women and children alive. It was so Islamic of them. Even though the fabled accounts of the imaginary Gog and Magog are still a score of verses hence, let's stay the course and consider the many ways al-Lahi/hu/ha continues to embarrass himself and Muslims along the way. Not a word was spoken about the Berith covenant relationship, when that was what mattered to Yahowah and all that pertains to us. There was no other reason for reaching out to Abram, conversing with him, or sharing their story with us. And yet, in Satan's replacement theology, we move from fables of fire to Yitzhak and Yaakov by the wrong names, the wrong father, and an errant assessment. Quran 21.072 and gave him, bestowing on him, Ishaq Yitzhak Isaac and Yaakov Jacob spoils of war edition and all we made right, good, and honest. Quran 21.073 and we made them aimitant to propose directions, mothers, being unlettered, community, and religion. Yaduna they guide and direct by our command and authority. And we indicated and revealed, suggesting to them, doing good and choice, and standing still al-Salat the prostration prayer performance and bringing al-Zakat the religious tax. And they were of us, Abidina worshippers, obeying submissives. Before we tear this edition to shreds, let's be mindful of how we got here. In Allah's misappropriation of the 316 Torah, he bragged about being familiar with Abraham, although it is by a different name with a different meaning. He presented him as dishonest, destructive, conniving, and religious, in the process of claiming that a pagan idol was God. He does not know where he is, with whom he is speaking, or the names of any of these people's gods, including the lone survivor. And yet, in a Suratun which began touting the name of Rahman, we find al-Lahi presented as the lord of these make-believe people because he is hurtful. At that, we interjects himself into his fable to freeze fire. All the while, there isn't a word of this found in the Torah, because it says just the opposite. On his own accord, Abram decided to walk away from Ur. And yet, al-Lahi/who/has childish tale with remedial dialogue matches what was written by rabbis while embellishing Judaism. And it is at this point that the new rabbi in town would have Muslims believe that the actual covenant relationship was not worth developing or even mentioning. It is then we are told that the aforementioned, we gave Ishaq and Yaakov to him, with no mention of the circumstance pertaining to Ishmael's birth, rejection, or dismissal, or of why and how Yitzhak came to be conceived or named. Then, the snake trips on his forked tongue, claiming that he bestowed Yaakov to Ibrahim when Yaakov was actually the second-born of Yitzhak. And contrary to al-Lahi/who/has appraisal, there were no spoils of war, all three men were often wrong and sometimes even dishonest. They were not an imitant by any of its connotations and there were no commands. Further, we was opposed to choice, so it is obvious he didn't offer or encourage it. Al-Salat and al-Zakat were first promoted in the 6th century by pagans in support of their rock house for rock gods. There is no mention of either anywhere in the Torah because Yahowah is opposed to bowing, groveling, praying, paying, taxing, and 317 bribing. And that is why there were no submissive and obedient worshippers in God's testimony, making al-Lahi/who/has regurgitated vomit incompatible. Having translated and contemplated the story of Lot as presented within the Torah, he would do well to sue, for a refund on restraint, judgment, perfection, and knowledge. While better than Muhammad, Lot was among the losers. He was a tragically flawed man with poor judgment and no self-restraint. So it is a wonder that the Quran misrepresents the Torah to this extent when one would have thought that Allah could have read it. Quran 21.074 and Lot Lot, we gave him Hukman restraint and judgment, perfected, and Il-Man signs and knowledge. And we rescued and saved him from al-Qaryati the entertainment, city/town, which was doing al-Qabaitha the wicked deeds, the foul and abominable things, the deceitful guile and the cunning and noxious disobedience. Lo, verily, they were a standing upright, people, someone treated badly, wretched and grievous, annoying corpses, fasikina disobedient. It is, of course, telling that Allah sidestepped the entire presentation and enactment of the Berith but was eager to immerse himself in the story of Sodom's demise, although he doesn't know the city's name. And while Lot was encouraged to leave Sodom before its destruction, he was not saved. The poor judgment and lack of morality that brought him to Sodom remained because his debauched and drugged lifestyle continued. However, having listened to Lot's irrational and immoral oratory in Sodom, Allah may well have contributed to his knowledge because he was a blithering idiot. And while Muhammad's repulsive and perverted sexuality would have been applauded among the Sodomites, they were not disobedient. God does not have laws or commands to obey, and he did not communicate any instructions to these gowned Gentiles. And lo, Allah's last sentence was incomprehensible. 3:18 Since Lot was a drunk who had incestuous sex with his daughters, we has a most perverted view of mercy and a perverse perception of right. Quran 21.075 And we entered him into our Rahim womb of favors, benefits, pardons, and mercy. Lo, verily, he of al-Salihina the right, good, honest, upright, and righteous, suitable and fit. I suppose the Islamic Lutan was presented as al-Salihina the right, good, honest, upright, and righteous, suitable and fit, to make Muhammad, who was similarly perverted, appear worthy of veneration. And of course, making Muhammad's appalling life and ongoing foibles appear acceptable was one of the three reasons these characters and stories were misappropriated and twisted from the Torah by way of the Talmud. The other two were that the non-prophet and ungod ran out of material and needed inspiration to provide a credible veneer for their death cult, and al-Lahi/who/ha needed to appear divine. He just wasn't very good at it for many reasons, one of which is that he was chronologically challenged, as is apparent by the haphazardly inverted order of the Quran itself. In the case of this Suratun, it opened with the never-ending argument against Allah's lone Rasulullah in what was obviously Babel. It then jumped backward in time 2070 years to the Islamic Musa and Haruna warding off and guarding. 3 verses later, we are listening to the menacing and scheming, idol-destroying and promoting Ibrahim in Mythicalville, turning back the clock another 6 centuries. 100 years later, in the next sentence, he has a son, but then Allah moves back in time again to before Yitzhak's birth to the destruction of Sodom. And even that tale presents revisionist Lutan to create the false impression that Muhammad wasn't so bad by comparison. But that was not enough for the temporally confused. Noach was born 1,000 years before Sodom was destroyed and Yitzhak was born. That notwithstanding, Quran 21.076 and Nohan, when he proclaimed from Kablut 3:19 acceptance and admittance, near and returned, direction of prayer and approach before, so istajabna we made a whole, tore up a thing, and answered lahu to him and we saved him and Allahu his people from al-azimi the great and glorious, honorable and momentous al-karbi the distressful and grievous affliction. In reality, Yahowah reached out to Noach expressly because he had disassociated himself from the religious, political, militant, and terrorizing culture of the people surrounding him, especially along the shores of the Black Sea. And it was God who called out to Noach, not the other way around. At the time, there was no direction of prayer or meaningful whole. And Noach, his 3 sons and their wives were kept safe, not Allahu his people. Further, the flood was neither glorious nor great, neither grievous nor afflicting. It was cleansing. Noach was not helped, but, instead, instructed. And he was not assisted relative to others since he had previously disassociated from them. And there would have been no reason for those who were drowned to have lied or denied, invented or fabricated anything pursuant to anyone's signs or proofs. Also, those who perished during the flood were not collected or gathered together. Quran 21.077 and we helped him from Alcom the standing upright who could Habu lied and denied, falsely inventing and fabricating falsehoods are ayat signs, marks, and proofs. Lo, verily, they were a standing upright treated badly, doing evil, vexing and annoying, so we drowned them collected and gathered together, all. As if feasting on ergot rather than rats, the snake pounces forward in time past Abraham and Moses to Daud and Shalomo. Excited no doubt by the flood, Satan takes us from year 1600 in 2368 BCE to between 992 to 972 BCE, which represent years 2976 and 2996 with the birth of Shalomo and passing of his father, Daud. And even then, the delusional one brings us to an imaginary conversation rather than to something meaningful or 320 instructive. With Daud and his son, Shalomo both being prolific prophets, there was no excuse for such drivel. Quran 21.078 and Dawud Daud David and Suleimana Shalomo Solomon, when Yakumani they restrained, exercising authority and gave judgment in al-Harthi the cultivated, tilled, and sown when Nafashat wool was fluffed up and scattered in it Ganamu obtained as spoils, sheep, Alcom the standing, people, and we were to hukmihim their restraining from exercising authority while judging a shahidina witness or martyr. Quran 21.079 and we knew and understood it Suleimana and each we gave restraint, exercising authority, and judgment and knowing. And Sakarna we mocked, scoffed, and jeered to subjugate with the wood of the mountains to swim and float, glorifying our praises, and the flew and fled birds. And we were the doers. Even Muslims know that this incident was not mentioned in the Bible. It isn't even contrived in Judaic literature. Neither the Quran nor Sunnah provides any context, not that it matters since this word salad of discordant ingredients was a complete waste of breath. All it demonstrates is that Allah had the intellectual acumen of a reptile. As for mocking the mountains into submission such that they swam around glorifying the praises of the voice behind this verbal diarrhea while the birds flew the coop, sure, why not? After all, credit to where credit's due. This is the God of 2 billion people spewing this nonsense. After resolving the dispute over the fluffy wool, subjugating mountains, and birds serving as a witness and beneficiary of their praise, we find that al-Lahi/who/ha was the doer, teaching Daud how to wear clothes, serving as a valet, I suppose. His snappy outfits were designed to protect him from a bunch of nastiness, including your mighty calamity, poverty, lowly submission, suffering, anxiety, and stress. Quran 21.080 and made him no making labuzin wearing clothes, armor, for you to guard and protect you from Basikum 321 your mighty calamity, poverty, lowly submissiveness, and miserable suffering, and stress caused by adversity, battle. Then will you give thanks, acknowledge the favor, be grateful, and offer praise. Even if we were to do as Muslims, and change labuzin from wearing clothes to armor, and Basikum from submissive suffering to battle, Daud did not make or wear armor. The one time it was offered to him, he took it off before facing Goliath because it was cumbersome and Yahowah was providing superior protection. Having made a fool of himself again, he pleads for attention, begging the ignorant to show their appreciation for the special favor of all he has said and done in his Quran. Then, with the wool flying, the mountains humming, the birds chirping, the clothes made, anxiety relieved, and gratitude granted, al-Lahi/ha/who moved his attention to Shalomo. Quran 21.081 and to Suleimana, the wind or spirit, blowing violently in a raging storm, flowing and pursuing a course by his command to the ground which we blessed in it. And we are of heirs to relations, all, affairs and matters knowers. Can you imagine how Yahowah feels about all of this? He offered us his guidance in a cogent and verifiable manner, leading to a loving family relationship with him, and humans by a margin of 1,000,000 to 1 prefer this drivel. It must be exasperating. I'm fed up and disgusted by this and my investment in time and sacrifice does not compare to his. When we realized that religious representatives of his people, rabbis, enabled this putrid mess, introducing Satan and the devil's advocate to these characters and accounts, I'm offended for him. Even worse, 1 billion progressives, those actually in control of governments, the media, societal mores, and academia, have joined the perverse chorus on behalf of Muslims against Jews. al-Lahi/who/ha would have Muslims believe that he 322 gave Daud the ability to subjugate mountains and birds and Solomon control over the wind when he couldn't even communicate intelligibly. Although, when speaking of himself, he seems to be somewhat credible. Quran 21.082 and of al-Shaitan the distant remoteness of Satan, concealed audaciousness of the adversary, the arrogant serpent, and the blameworthy devils who dive in and descend, immersed lahu for him and would make, do, or perform other than that. And we were of them hafizina guards, preserving and protecting. For Satan to prevail in beguiling the enslaved and obedient into worshipping him as a god, he must jettison the title of Hasatan the adversary, distancing himself from it while concealing his audacity. That is what the arrogant serpent is doing in this case while falsely attributing the process to Solomon, inferring that the devils dove down to perform tricks for him. But all the while, it's al-Lahi/hu/ha who is guarding, preserving, and protecting his demonic kin. And so now you know why I thought that our time in this Suratun would be rewarded. The more we know, the more obvious it becomes that Allah is Satan. Since I have followed Yahowah's instructions and applied his test to determine what testimony he inspired and what did not come from him, I know that the book of Job is a fraud, along with Jonah, Ezekiel, Esther, and Enoch. But the rabbis, having not done so, recited something from Job and Satan ran with it. And while no one can say when the events in the fable played out, it would have been long before Daud and Shalomo, such that we are now digressing again in time. But with the story revolving around Satan and afflictions, Allah must have loved it. Quran 21.083 Nayuba Yaub Job, when he called Rabbahu his Lord. Lo, verily, it has touched me the adversity and affliction. And you Rahman favored, benefited, and pardoned, al-323 Rahim womb of favors. Quran 21.084 So we made a hole, made some tears and perforations to reply lahu to him. And we removed, pulling away and taking off what on him of annoying adversity. And we gave him his people and like standing erect, mutilated and castrated, thereof, with them Rahman from ourselves and a reminder for the worshippers. This appears to be the second exorcism in as many verses. While it is a house divided, it is a clever trick. So now the chronologically incapacitated one jumps out of the brief interlude with Job, to a confab of bad characters, false gods, and false prophets. Quran 21.085 and Ishmael, and Idrisa/Osiris, and Tulkifli/Ezekiel heirs in relationships, all, from the bound and patient. Quran 21.086 And we got in them, entering them, in our Rahman womb of favors and benefits. Lo, indeed, they of the correct, honest, and righteous. Quran 21.087 And Tulnun/Jonah when he departed angrily, with temper flaring and indignation and thought that never we would decree upon him, then he called in al-Zolam the cruel oppression of the tyrannizing Lord that la no ilaha God illa but antayu. Subhanaka swimming in praise, rolling in glory, and floating in holiness be to you. Lo, verily, I am of al-Zalam subjugating lords and oppressive tyrants, wrongdoers. All praises to Allah. He has assembled a notable academy of false prophets and false gods. What began with al-Shayd the adversary, Satan, was joined by Job, Rahman, Rahim, Ismail, Osiris, Ezekiel, and Jonah along the way. He has created a fan club of sycophants and devilish devotees. Impressive. In spite of the hellish tributes being afforded the Lord of Demons, this is reassuring in a way. I am the only person who has deployed the Torah's test to identify the deadly diatribes of false prophets like Ezekiel, Jonah, and Job and 324 who has written extensively to prove these conclusions, and the first to demonstrate that the Torah is valid and the New Testament is not. As such, I'm the ideal individual to bring this message of satanic overtures in the Quran to Yisrael and Yehudim at this time. Quran 21.088 So, we made a hole, tore up some stuff, and responded to him and we saved him from the covered, veiled, and concealed confusion of obscuring the adversity. And thus, we save the believers, making them feel all safe and secure. Quran 21.089 And Zachariah when he called Rabbahu his exalted rabbi, my rabbi, not leave me alone while you the best at possessing the heirs. The Islamic variation on Zachariah is not to be confused with the great prophet, Zachariah remember Yah. This odd fellow was usurped from the Gospel of Matthew and is the caretaker of Maryam, the mother of the mythical misnomer, Isa, and father of the fabled Yahya the Baptist. His wife was barren and Allah fixed her womb, miraculously delivering the child who was never born. This Islamic Zachariah is presented randomly throughout in Quran 003, 037, 0038, 6.085, 19.002 and 007, and now here in Quran 021.089-090. Therefore, the rabbi of ridiculousness is adding mythical people to his assembly of false prophets and gods. It is so ecumenical of him. Quran 21.090 So we istajabnat dug a hole, tore up some stuff, and responded lahu to him and we gave lahu to him Yahya Yahowah is merciful John, the Baptist, setting right and rendering fit lahu for him his female, wife. Lo, verily, they used to hasten in good deeds and they demand and invoke to us ragaban desire and longing, and rahaban terrifying fear akin to a monk. And they were to us lowly, submissive, and humbled. Since Satan couldn't find an actual person to endorse him, he resorted to eliciting the sponsorship of the make-believe. And since all that he needed was for Muslims to believe, it seems to have worked out well for him. Should this have occurred, wouldn't it have invoked 325 divine, or rather in this case, demonic status upon the Virgin Maryam and her son, Isa, should they be the object of this spiritual interlude? Quran 21.091 And she who guarded, making inaccessible and unapproachable the large opening between her legs, chastity, so we blew and breathed into her of our spirit and we made her and her son a sign for the known worlds. Then after making a complete ass of himself, the snake, claims. Quran 21.092 Indeed, surely this your Ummatan unlettered mother, leader, guide, community, nation, and religion, one Ummatan religion and nation, mother and community. And I Rabbukum your Lord and Master, owner and possessor. So worship me in submissive humility and devout obedience. While I wouldn't recommend it, based upon what we have read, all that is required to acquire 2 billion slaves and to be worshipped as a god, even to have them slaughter, plunder, and abduct others, is to be ignorant, inarticulate, immoral, and irascible, well, actually demonic and sadistic. In fact, based on the relative popularity, people overwhelmingly prefer incompetent and incoherent psychopaths to God. But, alas, there was discontent in hell. Quran 21.093 But they cut off and severed their command, between themselves as heirs to us return. It's peculiar that they severed their command between themselves as heirs to us return, but this is the Quran and oddity is to be expected. And, of course, there is always an exemption because Allah needs jihadists to prevail. Quran 21.094 Then whoever does of the right while he a believer, then not concealed or rejected thankless his walk, striving, and exertion. Lo, verily, we of it wrote, a book. A book, in writing. Sure. I'll believe that just as soon as al-Lahi/who/ha clarifies whether haram means prohibited or sacred, and then reveals some evidence of his previous 326 terrorist activities. Quran 21.095 And haram prohibited or sacred, forbidden or holy, prevented as unlawful or hallowed as religious, upon Qur'an and entertaining investigation, a diligent search, or a city or town which we have exterminated and wasted, spoiled and destroyed that they not will return. Caution, please, as we are in the whiplash zone. You are cut off, you are rightly written, you are prohibited and exterminated, and now, here come the Gogians. Quran 21.096 Until when Futuhat has been opened and explained, disclosed and judged the Yajuj and Majuj. And they from remote relations as heirs, every, humpbacked, elevation, beget as progeny, hastening to crash, descend. Since this attempt at prophecy apparently takes some faith to finesse to clarify, let's consider it from the Islamic perspective, even though there is no apparent textual basis for their translations. Muhammad Asad 21.096 Until such a time as Gog and Magog are let loose, upon the world, and swarm down from every corner, of the earth. Or for your viewing pleasure, the clear Quran 21.096 Until, after, Gog and Magog have broken loose, from the barrier, swarming down from every hill. This duly noted, the acclaimed Islamic convert and scholar, Pickthall, claims that they will hasten out of every mound. Khan would have us believe, when Gog and Magog are let loose and swarm down from every hillside and they spread out, leaping across every barrier of land and sea. Bakhtir's translation says, they slide down from every slope. And Omar claims, Yajuj, Gog, and Majuj, Magog, are let loose, from their barrier, and they swiftly assault from all the high points. Ghali concurs, but adds, i.e., broken themselves into sections. Although, Shabir Ahmed thought it was incumbent upon him to write his own novel, and until Gog and Magog are let loose upon them and swarm down from every corner. Imperialist nations run over and dominate them. And then after some passage of time the desire for freedom and glory germinates in their hearts. 327 Once again, 18 hours 94 minutes. If they weren't contrived, and if Allah were credible, this might be concerning. But, nonetheless, there is always a lesson, even if tossed in the trash. Muslims are evidently aware that their wannabe God is drawing his credibility from the Bible, so they are ever ready to correct their God spelling such that the names match those found elsewhere. That is to say, they are aware that Allah can't spell or write $4 hashtag, plus. Quran 21.097 And has approached the promised the suitable and true, then lo and behold it raised up in horror with fixed stares, eyes of those reconciled, disbelievers. Oh woe to us! Lo, verily, we had been in unmindful neglect and intentional forgetfulness, ignorant of this. Nay, we were cruel and wrong subjugators and oppressive lords. Never able to turn down a buck, even when it results in the annihilation of Jews, Yathrib's rabbis sold Muhammad his scripture, this time reading excerpts of Ezekiel, unaware that they were speaking to Satan about Satan. Should you be curious, I disprove the notion of Gog and Magog, as well as the rest of Ezekiel, in volumes 2 and 3 of Babel, abominable and venomous. Suffice it to say for now, nothing the previous devil's advocate said was prophetic or accurate. And as such, the reconciled will not be confessing to Satan anytime soon. And that means al-Lahi/who/ha will have to find his faggots among Muslims. Quran 21.098 Verily, you and what you worship from besides al-Lahi, are hazabu faggots cast in as the firewood to fuel the flames of hell. You to it will come. Quran 21.099 If were these gods not they would have come to it. And all therein will remain forever. Quran 21.100 For them, therein, sighing and sobbing, groaning and moaning in grief, roaring over the distress. And they, 328 therein will not listen. Allah intends to torture everyone, from people to gods. He is insistent that you come and visit him in hell. So, be forewarned, he cannot be trusted near matches. He's a committed arsonist and sadist with a penchant for roasting flesh over fires unquenched by tears while serenaded by sighs. Let's be clear, especially since this is unmistakable. Not only is Allah Satan, but the adversary is unhinged. He has gone from clever opponent twisting words to entice to a ghoulish and macabre sadist drooling over tortures. He is a cruel and ruthless psychopath, feasting on inflicting unrelenting pain. Quran 21.101 Verily, those has gone forth for them from us the pleasant and pleasing those from it removed far. Quran 21.102 Not they will hear hasisaha sound of slaughter, the routing of the despised, and the devouring of the burned. And they in what their souls lusted and desired, remaining forever, dwelling endlessly. Speaking of his craving for torture and his complete lack of empathy, Satan, in the guise of Allah, explains. Quran 21.103 La yazanamumun not will express any grief or sorrow for them, nor show any sympathetic emotion toward them for Al-Akbar the greatest and most grievous, the glorious and self-aggrandizing, supreme al-fazayu terror endured by those horrified, in shock, and terrified. And the angels will come face to face with them, this your day which you were promised. Those who will seek to discredit the mountain of evidence from the Islamic Sunnah and Suratun brought to bear against Allah and Muhammad, the Quran and Islam, because I have properly assessed and stated that Allah is Satan, should be ashamed. It is not only obvious, it is rationally and morally indisputable. Satan confessed. 329 I have diagnosed Allah, and his corporeal manifestation, Muhammad, as schizophrenic psychopaths for a host of reasons, two of which are the extent to which they relish torturing others without remorse. These are the monsters Muslims and progressive support to the degradation and demise of humankind. Satan envisions a day that will make climate change look like child's play in comparison. Quran 21.104, that day we will roll up and fold over the sky, like rolling up a written scroll, stoning the inscribed testimony. As we began former fabrication, we will return and repeat it, a threat and promise upon us. Indeed, we are doers. Amongst all of this hate speech, there is another confession. al-Lahi/hu/ha is not only threatening to fold up and bring down the sky to destroy the earth, he is also threatening to roll up and destroy all previous inscribed testimony, doing away with Yahowah's Torah, YYV5C3 instructions and prophets. Then, after extinguishing the planet and its atmosphere, Satan claims that he'll measure up and fabricate a new one more to his liking, this one without God or his people to rival him. And while this is all similar to the claims found in Ezekiel, rest assured, should Satan prevail, people will not be included going forward, no matter what he says in the interim. It takes chutzpah to claim to be the creator and recreator, in addition to the author of previous written testimony, when al-Lahi/hu/ha couldn't so much as scribe a single Suratun. Quran 21.105 Certainly, we wrote in the writing from long ago and far off the remembrance that the ground will inherit my slaves the right. Lo, no. al-Lahi/hu/ha was as inarticulate and illiterate as his alter ego, the ignorant and dim-witted oral reciting Razuli. The reason Satan claims Yahowah's testimony as 330 his own is because he is intellectually incapable and morally inept. This Quran is irrefutable proof that Allah was dumb as a stone. As you read this next statement, remember that the words and phrases inside parenthesis come from Muslims trying to resolve their God's inability to communicate cogently. They were added by translators without any textual basis. Quran 21.106 Indeed, in this, the Quran, surely is Labalagan a reaching and arriving, a message, for calm those standing still, a people, who are, worshippers, of Allah and for those who act practically on the Sunnah legal ways of the Prophet. Quran 21.107 And not we have sent you, Muhammad, as, Rahman a womb of favors, benefits, pardons, and mercy for the known, the worlds. Quran 21.108 Speak, Muhammad, only it is indicated, suggested, and revealed to me that your God, one. So will you Muslims submit to him? As stated many times previously, the moment we hear, lo, verily, surely, indeed, certainly, right, or true, in the Quran, we know that lies will surely follow. Although, there are exceptions. In this case, indeed, was followed by incomprehensible nonsense. Thereafter, we are reminded that the Rasululah's authority was limited. Should Quran 21.108 be accurate, then, only it is revealed to me that your God, one, means we can dispense with the other 6,235 verses. And thank goodness, there is only one al-Lahi/hu/ha. I don't think I could endure returning to hell to expose and condemn another. As we near the conclusion of the Suratun, it is apparent that al-Lahi/hu/ha was beginning to nod off because there is just no making sense of this. We don't know who is speaking, who is being addressed, whether they are close, turned away, or friendly, whether the undisclosed individual is listening or speaking, or even what he is attempting to hear or convey. All we know is that the 331 wannabe God who disavows his oaths is wasting everyone's time with another veiled threat and promise. Quran 21.109 But if they, disbelievers, Christians, and Jews, to Allah are close, turned, or have friends, from Islam, then say, at Hantakum I give ear to you, proclaiming and permitting, I announce to you of war, over and against, directed and established uniformly. But not I know near, at hand, and approaching or far away, after, and remote, the torment which, you are threatened and promised. While Allah may not even know what he was trying to say, it does not say much for his non-prophet that he does not know anything about the future. And what's the point? Quran 21.110 Lo, verily, he knows al-jara min al-ka the apparent of the noise, declared of the speech. And he knows what you conceal. Since Rabbi Rahman/al-Lahi has demonstrated that he knows nothing of what he speaks, it's certain that he does not know what others are saying. But this we know, the ungod of Islam is itching to roast the rejectors, a gift from the ungod to mankind. Quran 21.111 And not I know perhaps it may be fitnate in a trial to persecute, burn, and afflict for you and an enjoyable gift to come. Quran 21.112 He said, Rabbi, suitably restrain, duly command, and exercise required authority. Rabbuna our Lord and Master, owner and possessor, is, al-Rahman, the one begged for help against what you assert, ascribe, and attribute. We agree on one thing, everyone in the Quran needs help. But clearly, Allah is not in a position to provide it. Continue reading.